That one fixer that you shouldn't Google unless you put Cyberpunk next to his name. Ah, yes, Mr. Hands. Of all the fixers of the 2077 landscape, Hands comes across as the most polite, the most debonair, and for some people he might actually be considered the most likable of all of NC's fixers. But what lurks beneath that coiffed facade and delicious tea of the guy with his hands in who knows how many Night City cookie jars? Hello, my name is Liddy, and welcome to Spilling Tea. I'm kidding. Shaped by Stories, where we unpack how characters shape stories and how those stories shape us. Let's spill some tea. I'm sorry, you're gonna probably hear some tea puns and probably some hand puns. Let's go. Mr. Hands, not born in Enumclaw, Washington, is, at least to his mother, Wade Bleecker. We don't know if Hands was born into a wealthy family or if he worked his way up to the corporate top, but Hands once had an extremely successful career in the corporate world. Wade Bleecker was actually one of the top corpos at Petrochem, and while this requires a video all its own, I think, Petrochem is that corporation in Cyberpunk 2077 that has so many little references everywhere that kinda hint at maybe something bigger going on behind the scenes with the corp. At least that's what I think. I've seen a number of people on Reddit and in the comment sections of my videos sort of pose a similar idea. And you know what? That kind of lines up nicely with the story of Wade Bleecker, a guy who's definitely doing 99% of his shit behind the scenes. But as they say, the higher you rise, the harder you fall. And so it was with Wade, who, after a quote, sudden shakeup in upper management at Petrochem, survived an attempted assassination attempt from his former coworkers. We can only imagine the shenanigans that Hands pulled to piss off his rivals to that point. I'm sure just like Arthur Jenkins or a Corporate V and countless other corpos, he probably screwed over some people, made some bad calls, and, well, his whole world fell apart. It kind of makes you think of Meredith and the good old Anthony Gilchrist back pre-heist. Those were the days. So Hands went to ground following this assassination attempt, going so far as to, according to the database, change his physical appearance and picking up the moniker of Mr. Hands. Who knows, maybe the cosmetic changes were only as dramatic as pre-2.0 Hands versus post-2.0 Hands. We don't know. And I'm pretty sure that the name Mr. Hands comes from the fact that that's all you really see of him, because the rest of him is in the shadows. Just his chrome hands are the only part of him you really get, aside from his silhouette. He's like this disembodied pair of hands pulling the strings of all the puppets everywhere is the image that I think of. And where most would have seen just chaos and garbage and just a general waste of time, Hands saw potential in the trash fire district of Pacifica. And by 2077, unless you count Kurt Hansen, Hands is the top fixer in Pacifica. Now, some of you may recall Dexter Deshawn's history as a fixer with a lot of business ties to Pacifica. That is, in fact, where Dexter's ill-fated job took place, which involved Rhino and likely T-Bug, and ended up sparking a gang war in the district. This sort of mysterious event is what led to Dex hiding out in space. One has to wonder if Dex's absence was when Hands swooped in to claim the territory. Maybe, given the events of Phantom Liberty, Hands was the one who initially knocked those dominoes behind Dex's fall. I wouldn't put it past him, especially considering what he's doing throughout Phantom Liberty. Hands also references Dexter Deshawn directly by referring to the fact that the data that he's given V to navigate the Black Sapphire has the guarantee of no info leaks surrounding it. Nobody knows that V has this data, unlike a certain someone. I'll play the clip right here.
And, though this goes without saying, the data, its source, are completely secure. No one knows you have it. Data leaks, or lack thereof, are the difference between myself and, say, the late Mr. Deshawn.
I just think it's interesting that he makes that dig that he references Dex. I mean, lots of people do reference Dex for his fuck-ups, but I don't know, just knowing the whole Dex was in Pacifica first potential versus Mr. Hand swooping in after, I don't know. Maybe Dex's big op in Pacifica fell apart because somebody found out about something. Maybe Hands exploited that weakness. Who knows? There's actually a line towards the end of his quests in Phantom Liberty where he makes a Wizard of Oz reference, where V is sort of one of the characters in the book, and then when V asks, well, what character are you? He says, why, I'm the narrator. Like, this is the kind of guy Hands is. This is how he operates. He's the game master. He is the guy that sees what all the other players are doing, or at least that's what he tries to be. Mr. Hands, as we know, is veiled in shadows until we meet him in person during the events of Phantom Liberty. So normally, Hands never meets with any mercenaries, and he likely doesn't meet with very many clients either. Hands is known for his anonymity. He takes his privacy extremely seriously, and while you might think that this is just a business tactic meant to protect himself, meant to maybe make himself have a bit more theatrical power because, oh, he's so mysterious, but V can actually uncover, through eavesdropping, that Hands has something extremely precious to protect. Hands has a family, including a young daughter, and apparently 3 unnamed ex-wives, but I like how it says on the wiki, citation needed. And all I can think of is that Mort from Madagascar apparently has like 9 unnamed deceased wives. And I don't know why, but Mr. Hands feels very Mort-esque to me, and I will not be elaborating further on that because that's wild, but I think of that. Anyway, here's the clip of the phone call that he has with his daughter.
Yes, honey? Dad's working. Now, I see. And what is it your mother can't help you with? Not to worry. I'll find him the moment I get home. Can that be our deal? You've my word, Sugar Bear. Yeah, I love you too. Bye-bye now.
The fact that Hands' headquarters is in Dogtown and that he says to his daughter that he'll be home soon makes me wonder if A, he is hiding out in Dogtown to avoid Petrochem, but also B, if his daughter is also in Dogtown somewhere with his apparent wife. Maybe they live in the basement of the Heavy Hearts Club. But it is extremely sweet to see this very personal side to an otherwise very businessman-y kind of guy. We become so used to, in this world of cyberpunk, the greed and the bloodlust and the rage and the general despair and fear of almost all the characters we encounter. But with Mr. Hands, we see behind closed doors. We see when he's on the phone with his daughter that, oh yeah, these people are humans with lives and families. And then V just says, a la Claptrap from Borderlands 2, screw those guys. So Alex Jordan, who is Mr. Hands' voice actor following the Phantom Liberty release,
he has a family, and there is a tenderness to him. There's a legitimate tenderness to him. Mm-hmm. When we overhear him on the phone to his daughter, and we hear him talking about, you know, their child's mother, and there's a softness in his voice. And to know that there's this tenderness to this person, which again, it's not often within Night City that you kind of really encounter parental relationships, right?
Yeah.
Because it is such a brutal world. I mean, the line delivery was always going to be the same with the first and second session stuff. You know, again, just as I said, we'll go back and redo the first bits because you start to find the character more.
Yeah.
But he was always going to have the same sort of feeling because he has this outward projection and what he shows to people. But for me personally, and my personal relationship to him, suddenly finding out that bit of information changed how I felt about him.
his take on his character's love for his family is also just very sweet, and it really does help to make Hans a lot deeper of a character. He is not just a standard fixer who's after money and power. He actually has layers that, while we don't get to unpeel them completely, that they're hinted to really does make him feel a lot more real. I know they say fear the man with nothing left to lose, but you know, I have the feeling that for Mr. Hands, he would do just about anything to prevent losing those who are most important to him, like taking over a certain territory run by a certain colonel. An important thing to note about Hands is a lot of the feline iconography he has surrounding him, as well as ancient Egyptian iconography too. His base in 2077 is the Heavy Hearts Club, which is a pyramid. It's a super cool club, and as mentioned by Brock Warner 9951 in my post on Mr. Hands, the light shooting from the peak of that pyramid into the sky, it's pretty well up there with the height of the Corpo Plaza. That's an amazing detail. And yeah, Hands is definitely the type to shoot for the stars when he shoots his shots. Hands has these two giant holograms of these Sphinx cats, again, ancient Egypt, in his office. And in ancient Egypt, cats in general were seen as these venerable creatures, which of course they are, symbols of fertility and justice. They were actually often mummified and buried in tombs, and most importantly for this video, they also took up quite a few slots in the pantheon as gods. And the goddesses that I want to talk about today are the dual sister goddesses, Bastet and Sekhmet. So these two goddesses are, depending on the time period you're looking at, two sides of the same deity. It really depends, I think, on what kingdom you're talking about. Bastet, as time went on, became noted for her patronage of fertility and childbirth as a ward against disease and pestilence, as well as for being a more gentle figure, as well as a symbol of motherhood. While Sekhmet really embodied the original traits of the Bastet character, the lioness side. Sekhmet is a warrior, she is a bold protector, and she is, in some legends, an agent of Ra's vengeance and great power. She, in contrast with her sister goddess, could cause disease upon her enemies.
Don't make me mad, Robert.
In one particular legend, she was apparently so lost in the sauce of war, she couldn't stop killing people. She just had this insatiable bloodlust, and she almost slaughtered everyone in Egypt. And you know, things were bad. Until the rest of the pantheon decided that dumping an ungodly amount of red ochre beer into the Nile was the only way to get her to stop, because then she'd see it and be like, oh, that must be blood, I should drink it. And of course this plan worked. Sekhmet became an alcoholic, and now with a new focus, went home to the gods. And I just thought that this was a funny legend and I wanted to share it with you all, but also, it goes to show that Sekhmet / Bastet can fuck shit up if she wants to. I also like that Hands' suit is a deep red, like the red ochre beer as well. Like the protector side of him has to be dulled, it has to be enrobed in this drunken color so he can see the playing field more clearly, which I know you wouldn't think being drunk would be the thing. I just like that. I don't know, I was like, red ochre, eh? Look at Hands' suit. I also find it interesting that Hands in his personality has this sort of duality to him, where he has this polite veneer, but this veneer is hiding this almost undulating current of a very lethal opponent beneath. You might be seeing where I'm going with mentioning cats here. Barghest is dogs. And you know, the general comparison between cats and dogs is probably one we all know relatively well. Considering Hansen, he is like a junkyard dog. He is loud, he's aggressive, he utilizes force. He's barking at people over his speakers all day long, he just can't stop. Whereas Hands is quiet and shadowy. He's clever, he's rather velvety smooth. And he, also like a cat, has this glorious mane even built into his suit. Dog people versus cat people. It's the war to end all wars. Also, another detail relating to ancient Egypt and Mr. Hands. So the code that Hands gives you to get up to his floor on the Heavy Hearts. So the code that Mr. Hands gives you to unlock the elevator, floor code, or whatever, so you can go and visit him, he gives you the code 2589, which is, in fact, the starting year of Pharaoh Khufu's reign in ancient Egypt. I forget what kingdom. 4th dynasty. I don't know. And the thing about Pharaoh Khufu is that the Great Pyramid of Giza was built as his tomb. I also have to mention that the Great Pyramid of Giza is both the oldest and the sole remaining wonder of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And that's crazy, because it's over 4,500 years old. Like, yes, it's lost its limestone casing and cap, and it's a bit shorter now than it was back in its heyday, but it's still there. Like, it's crazy to think the amount of historical figures that we've read about in books have seen it, that we can also see it. You could definitely also see its far smaller presence in Dogtown, as utilized by Hands, as a symbol of the kind of legacy he might seek if legacy is important to him. And I know I'm ranting too much about this, but this is my cyberpunk conspiracy. When you look at the diagram of the inner chambers of the pyramid, the King's Chamber could be said to be not unlike the placement of Mr. Hands' office above the club proper, like the gallery is below the King's Chamber, but then below the gallery is the Queen's Chamber. So if you view the gallery as the Heavy Hearts Club, then the Queen's Chamber is in the basement, which makes me think, oh my god, he really is keeping Mrs. Hands in the basement, which it would very Mort-esque indeed. I think Mort would do that too. He'd keep one of his currently alive wives in the basement. Jesus Christ. So the other thing too to consider in this section about ancient Egypt is the significance of a person's heart in their final journey to the afterlife in ancient Egyptian lore. So rather than the brain, the heart was believed to be the seat of the soul, if you will. Specifically a person's moral, intelligent center. And part of the judgment of the dead involved a person's heart being weighed against the feather of Ma'at. And this test was actually usually administered by the god Anubis, at least in part, which explains why there's Anubis statues holding up the pyramid of the Heavy Hearts Club. So if a person's heart was in balance with the feather of Ma'at, that meant they could pass on to the afterlife. It basically implied that they lived a moral, sinless life in accordance with the beliefs of the ancient Egyptians. However, if a person's heart was heavy, then they were denied access to the afterlife. Their heart, meaning their soul, was consumed by Amit, which would basically destroy a person / send them into a second permanent state of death. It was not desirable. So it being called the Heavy Hearts Club sort of implies that the business that goes on in there, the people in there who are sinning, well, they aren't exactly morally spotless, which is sort of a fitting name for this town of dogs. The other thing too is when you compare it to Rogue and her bar being the afterlife, V was allowed to physically enter that bar before they died, but then they were ultimately denied the afterlife when they were essentially resurrected with Johnny in their head after their death. You could definitely look at it like V's heart was too heavy or something like that. I think it's cool. And it's even more cooler when V does get to go to the Heavy Hearts Club and works for Mr. Hands. And really, if you do take the Phantom Liberty ending, then yeah, you would kind of feel like maybe this is the heavy heart ending. Like, sure, you didn't die, but how are you going to be able to live with yourself? This all connects to the whole secure your soul thing, which I think really peaks with Songbird's story. We're going to get into that. I just thought that was a pretty interesting little thing about Mr. Hands and the Heavy Hearts Club. If someone knows any more ties between Hands and ancient Egypt that are really, really interesting, like, please share. I love this shit. But there is one last little thing about cats. Something to note in a story where almost all of the characters are tied in some way to birds. Hawk, bald eagle, songbird, there might be more I'm forgetting. And the way that these 3 characters specifically can almost serve themselves up to Mr. Hands' plans is awfully convenient. We don't exactly know how long Hands has been planning to take over Dogtown, but he's been playing quite the game in these months leading up to V's arrival on the 2077 chessboard. V's first interaction in 2077 with Hands involves him getting them in contact with the Voodoo Boys, which might not seem like a big deal, but the fact that Hans is able to broker a sort of line of communication implies that he is a very, very well-connected guy, because not just anyone is able to do that, considering how close-knit and under wraps the Voodoo Boys are. And we can really see an expansion on that throughout the events of Phantom Liberty. Did Hans know about Hansen's intent to crash Space Force 1? Well, I think that's entirely possible because Hans has had a mole in Barghest for quite some time. We first hear about Hans's interest in putting Chester Bennett on top of Dogtown after Kurt Hansen's death, but if you're the snooping type, you can find a little computer in Hans's office and read some emails between him and Bennett. And there's this particular email exchange about Hansen's work unearthing Cynosure. Mr. Hans writes, "Hello, Chester. I must admit, I knew nothing about your commanding officer's affinity for exploring underground bunkers. Is there anything else I have not been made aware of lately?" And then Chester says, "He planned it with Yago and Murphy. I was in charge of securing that other thing we talked about and had no idea about Cynosure or anything related. But don't worry, as far as I know, he doesn't even have a buyer for that tech. Got more important things to deal with right now." And then Mr. Hans is like, "Regardless, I do hope it was the last time you have kept me in the dark on such a matter. Such an approach would not benefit either of us. Kind regards." With Chester, Hans is a bit like the cat who caught the canary. Or so he thinks. Following the crash of Space Force 1, Hans calls V, not the other way around, and basically he gives them the keys to the Dogtown castle plus a car. What a guy. He's extremely polite and professional, which makes him stand out from the other fixers. Like, El Capitan is nice and he's goofy. Rogue is harsh but to the point. And also, as a side note, her bar is the afterlife, and like it's built into a literal morgue, versus Hans's pyramid, which is stepping stone to the afterlife in ancient Egypt. Rogue is basically at her end in a morgue that feels far more final of a place, whereas Hans is trying to almost transcend, and I just really like that difference. Wakako scares me, and I'm always afraid to let her down, so no, I don't screw up any of her gigs. Dino is slimy, but he pays well. Regina acts so little like a fixer in some ways, I actually often forget she's a fixer. Among them, Hans really is a standout. But weirdly enough, Hans and Dakota Smith, to me, they feel the most similar, which sounds really odd when you consider their differing circumstances, but let me explain. Dakota, as I get into in her video, does her work as a static fixer for, primarily money, sure, but she also takes on gigs that restore the balance of power in the Badlands. AKA, there should be no one holding too much power out there. That is neutral territory. If Militech's getting greedy, Dakota sends someone out there to undermine them. If the Wraiths are getting a little spicy, you send someone out there to cut them down. Dakota doesn't say much about her origins with the Aldecaldos, but there is a degree of sorrow, at least I think there is, in her very bare-bones reasons for remaining a static in Night City. In a way, that does remind me of Hans and his potentially more personal motive for the things he does. Hans also does speak of his gigs for V in Dogtown and his work removing Hansen from power as a sort of balancing out the chessboard kind of thing, as pointed out by Mary Beth Leeton in my Mr. Hans post. And Hans, considering all his gigs, does this extremely efficiently. After completing a few gigs for Mr. Hans, which are necessary for his help in getting into the Black Sapphire, Hans invites V to a face-to-face meeting in the Heavy Hearts Club, which is a pretty big deal. Hans showing himself to a merc, as well as agreeing to help them for, free in exchange for their services. This meeting, I think, is all to facilitate a more trusting working relationship between the two, however, maybe to kind of foster a sense of loyalty between the mercenary and the fixer. Hans gives V quite a bit of hard-to-get data and maps of the Sapphire interior, and he doesn't ask for payment, because Hans sees opportunity here with V. Hans frames it as him sort of helping V in return for V's help with the gigs and everything, but Hans is also relatively transparent about the fact that these gigs are meant to give him more power in the Kingdom of Dogtown. But Hans is still crafty and kind of like trying to make it seem like, well, I genuinely like and respect you as a business partner, V, so I'm going to help you. It's like, well, this still ultimately helps himself. V is this presumably hyper-competent merc from Night City who snuck into Dogtown, who he very well could know by this point has FIA ties. V is the pawn that he has been waiting for, and V is also dying. I don't think that Hans ever mentions that, or the relic, or anything. But if any fixer would know on their own without V having to tell them, I think it would be Mr. Hans. I wouldn't be shocked if he's more well-connected than Rogue at this point, just because of his time in Corpo circles. And I feel like he would totally look at V's situation and be like, oh, they're desperate, I can use this. And I don't think it's any coincidence that after talking about the political movements going on in Dogtown, he picks up Chessmen of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs. So I've never read this book, and maybe there's lots in the actual story that connects to Phantom Liberty. But if you recall, in the Phantom Liberty music video / post-credit scene, Myers and Hansen are playing a game of chess where Myers knocks over So-Mi's piece into a void. Hans also has a line utilizing some chess language. And according to Black Ravel, in her comment on my QC theory video, there is a cut line about Kurt in the game files saying that he was, quote, tired of chess. Was Hans just telling us exactly what we were to him from the very beginning? What we are? He kind of did blatantly, but I don't know, the holding the book up there really makes it feel like I think he's really trying to tell us something. Hans can actually be found at Hansen's party at the Black Sapphire, and he will tell V whether they were successfully sneaky or not. He's particularly impressed by a sneaky V. The other thing too is that at the Black Sapphire, Hans is sitting with a lady who is different in almost every playthrough. I think she's randomly generated, like the lady in Kurt Hansen's booth downstairs. And I'm just like, Hans, is this one of your 11 mistresses? Like, because he definitely, well, he apparently has 3 unnamed ex-wives. There's the mother of his child, and this lady too. So it's just Hans gets around. He's awful handsy. He's real good with his hand. Okay, I'm sorry. So almost every gig that V does in Phantom Liberty for Mr. Hans attacks a specific issue or place in Dogtown that gives Hans either a leg up or some sort of international contact. There's only really one gig where it's kind of like, and that's the first one. I think it's his only remaining gig from pre-Phantom Liberty, where basically V just helps him steal some drugs and sell them through a Ripper and get richer. You know, you gotta help a guy out. The rest of his gigs are all really, really interesting and are written with so many different moral conundrums and everything. Like, there's no outcome that's really like a good or a bad outcome for these quests. It really just depends on your perspective. I wish all the gigs in Cyberpunk 2077 were like Mr. Hans' gigs. There's the one gig where you have to go and rescue Dogtown's only not-for-profit Ripper Doc. And you know, for Hans, this gig going successfully where you protect the Ripper Doc helps him to build a stronger relationship with the people of Dogtown. For people to look at Mr. Hans and say, well, that guy at least gets shit done and did do something for us, etc., etc. While also trying to manage the scavs a little more politically. I just want to say with this quest, it just feels so icky no matter what you decide, because you can either give the Scav's brother's body to the doctor so he can harvest the implants. The doctor also admits that he turned the life support off on this guy, and who knows if he's not being entirely honest. But his argument is that this Scav, who probably harmed a lot more people in life, will help a lot of people in death. So there's that. But then you run the risk of the Scavs coming back in full force and just shooting up the entire clinic. So the best outcome is to stop the Scav, whose name is Nika, from killing the doctor and giving her brother's body back. Even though Scavs, like, if we're really getting into the moral rungs of Night City, they're definitely on the lowest, like, lower than V, at least in many people's opinions. But one interesting thing that I stumbled across this very recently after playing this gig so many times, you can find Nika by her brother's grave out near the walls of Dogtown, and you actually share like a moment there with her. It's really brief, and it's like you can kind of express your condolences because, you know, V lost Jackie, who they saw as a brother. And it's just like, oh my god, I love this game. I love that I had no idea. It was just a complete accident that I found that, and it's just really cool. But like my V rolled up with the radio blasting, so it's like I just show up to this tender moment of like a sister mourning her brother, and I'm just going.
Why, Gaspar? Why?
Hey, Nika. Hanging in there?
What are you doing here?
It's all right. I was just walking by.
Hanging in there. Do I have a choice?
Listen, me and the scavs don't exactly get along. Be good to keep our ways separate.
I won't go looking for you, that's for sure.
I'll leave you alone.
I am already.
There's one where you can choose to help an ex-Zetatech corpo who stole a prototype from Zetatech, where if you convince Mr. Hands to help him lie low and extract the prototype and basically give him a sort of life in Dogtown, Hands gets access to a very successful corporate techie, while also building a stronger relationship with Zetatech because Hands is not going to tell him that this guy's alive and took their prototype. Hands also might be kind of reminded of his own situation with Petrochem once upon a time, although I think Hands was probably a little better equipped to escape Petrochem than Hassan was equipped to escape Zetatech. But still, you know, ex-corpos gotta stick together, right? Gig number 4 is where you have to take out a Voodoo Boy's netrunner for a client who is being extorted under the threat that the Voodoo Boys will shut her implants down and kill her if she doesn't give them what they want. And should you choose to assist the Netwatch officer in this quest, you can actually get Mr. Hands in contact with Netwatch, where they offer to protect Hands' client in exchange for V leaving Milko alive for their own investigation. So yeah, Hands gets an in with Netwatch, kinda. For waiting for Dodger, this quest can result in you killing one of Hansen's higher-ups, or leaving him alive for Mr. Hands to potentially profit off of later. This quest is funny because you have these two goof cops who were just trying to make extra money by giving drugs or returning drugs to Dodger that were apprehended by the NCPD, I think, but then the guy that they had with them ate a bag of synthetic cocaine, and it's just like, what? Holy shit. The fact that by telling the truth to Dodger is what makes him let them go is kind of hilarious because he thinks it's so funny. He's like, oh my god, I can't kill you after that. That's way too fucking funny, and it's just, oh. And if you kill Dodger anyway, that could still be a bit of a tactic to use against Hansen to make him feel like he's not as untouchable as he might think he is. Either way, this benefits Hands. Fun fact, the sister of Sasha Yakovleva, who is the netrunner from the Edgerunners-esque music video for Let Me Down, Stella is her sister. Stella is the wife of one of these cops, and that was just really cool to see, like, wow, that's her. I think she's in the music video in like a screenshot or something. Gig number 6 is another one where, well, yes, you can kill Leon Rinder, another of Hansen's goons. Leon Rinder was already kind of like out of the picture anyway. He wasn't that big of a deal in terms of Hansen's power structure. However, this quest can be a huge deal for Hands in building more loyalty among the stacks towards him. So Rinder killed a bunch of Stacks citizens when he went on a cyberpsychotic rampage. And Brianna Dolson, along with many other members of the Stacks, want revenge. And Brianna Dolson basically says that Hansen doesn't do shit even when his own people are getting up to no good. So turning to Mr. Hands, and Hands producing results, well, that could benefit him in the long run. So long as V doesn't send Reinder to Regina, because then they find out that Reinder was not killed, and then that's not gonna be good for Mr. Hands. Gig number 7 is Spy in the Jungle, which can result in Hands having some contacts potentially with access to an ex-Sove Oil agent, as well as some contact with 2 Brazilian intelligence agents. This is one where you definitely see Hands getting his fingers in some international pockets. And again, you also take out a bunch of scav muscle, including Boris Rybakov, who is a pretty tough scav. There's a lot of things in his gigs that result in many scavs being killed, and I think that that's intentional. Also, this gig has dinosaurs and a mosasaur skeleton, so it's an automatic win for me. So gig number 8 is Talent Academy, one of the best gigs in Phantom Liberty in my opinion, and that's where you break into Fiona Vargas's Center for Neuromotor Development, which illegally chips and modifies young kids so they can be more profitable athletes as adults. They're basically show horses. And Hands basically needs V to break in, steal their tax information, and get out. And while I'm sure Hands has a client who wants this tax information, I'm sure there's something else on that data disk that Hands could use against these ultra-powerful rich people around the world. Why not? But also, I just found this gig interesting because V can actually confront Hands about what goes on in that laboratory, saying, "You knew about this? Like, what the fuck?" And he's like, "Of course I knew."
You knew they're chipping kids there?
Why so dramatic? It's an open secret by now. Everyone knows what goes on there. Few care. If I've offended your sense of moral decency, I do apologize. Contract closed. Until the next time, V.
And it's a nice reminder that as polite and as polished as Hands is, even though he does have a kid himself, that doesn't mean he's some altruistic benefactor of the needy and the vulnerable just for the sake of it. Who knows, maybe this whole gig is just so he can expose this facility and blah 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 and get it taken out through an indirect way, but I don't know, I kind of doubt that. Hands is probably just like, if it's not my kid in that sort of situation, then I don't care. Which doesn't make him unique at all. I just find it's easy to get wrapped up in how he presents himself, and then after this quest and that dialogue option to be like, oh right, he is a scummy businessman like the rest of them. Like everybody else in this world. That's the one thing too, I have a tough time ever playing a V that is mean to little Tommy Walker in that quest. A V that is mean to kids is just, I can't do it, I can't. So gig number 9 is Heaviest of Hearts, and you guess where it takes place. So this quest involves going in to delete testimony that a dad gave against his criminal son in court, that he gave because he was offered a lot of money for it. You could also choose to let the district attorney keep the footage, so she can use it to build a case against this serial killer that she's been trying to put behind bars for 2 years, or at least so she says. And you can choose to delete the testimony or not. If you don't delete it, then that makes Hands not super thrilled, but Hands is at least impressed that V managed to sneak into his club and not cause any bloodshed, so you know, there is that. Hands does respect the game for that. This quest is another reminder that Hands is, while for sure he has his sights set on power, he's still a businessman who will take a variety of contracts so long as the client pays well. I also wonder if, considering the Night City district attorney is in his bar just down 1 floor or so from him, did he know some of what she was up to? Maybe he sought to undermine her for some unknown reason. Or maybe he's just trying to get some influence with the Valentinos, potentially? As the serial killer she's trying to take down is a Valentino. I think Michael Maldonado's son, the man who gives you the gig, he's a Valentino. And when you remember that in the Phantom Liberty ending that takes place in 2079, the Padre is no longer in power. And who could swoop in to take over Haywood? Well, Pacifica is right across the Storm Channel, so maybe it is Hands. I mean, Hands is certainly competent enough, I think, to make a pretty good stab at it. I don't know, maybe he's thinking really far ahead here. And the last gig, number 10, this is a fun one. So this is called Roads to Redemption. And it basically follows Nell Springer, who, in her past, was associated with some environmental terrorism stuff against Biotechnica, so she needs V to help stop another bombing by her former organization, and V has to break into Kurt Hansen's lab, tinker with the bomb ordered by her group, and basically stop the plot. And after this, Nell can either be accosted by Biotechnica and V can just let them take her, or V can fight and protect the client. This makes Hans happy because you protected the client. You accomplished everything she wanted you to do. Later on, though, if you do save Nell, V can get ambushed by Biotechnica agents after receiving a fake text from Nell. So maybe Nell is dead. I've seen some people say she sold you out. I think she'd only do that under torture, though. But the thing that this quest makes me ask is, how did Biotechnica know that Nell was there? I mean, granted, it could be anything. They're a corporation with lots of power. I'm sure they have their own eyes in the sky kind of deal. But maybe Hans arranged that and just pretended to be like, that's good, you know, you protected the client, you got me money, etc., that's fine. But then afterwards, because Nell was alive, maybe arranged her capture again? Because we never really do figure out what the hell happened to Nell. Mysterious. Also, Nell as a character is really interesting, especially when you compare her with Johnny. Johnny's kind of critical of her, and V can kind of poke around his opinion surrounding the organization she was with, Crimson Harvest. And it's just interesting to see, like, Nell, after being involved with a terrorist plot that killed a lot of innocent people, like, Nell expresses deep remorse for her actions and she's sort of trying to atone. That's why this gig exists in the first place. Like, Johnny's quite critical of her and, you know, he's sort of doubling down on what he did a bit in this quest, depending on what you say to him. But, like, I think Johnny really does regret his actions that day. Not just because he died, but yeah, no, I think he does see as all those deaths amounted to really nothing. The world is still a shithole. I realize that this might not be canon, but the part in his memory of his death, where Saburo is the one who soul kills him, he says to that technician who's absolutely, like, she hates Johnny and because her husband died in the tower when it blew up, and Johnny says, I didn't want him to die. And, like, I do think that is genuine. I think for Johnny, it's just really hard for him to kind of come to terms with his actions that day, or as he remembers them. Johnny was never really able to atone in the way that Nell is attempting to because he died. So what have we learned? We've learned that Mr. Hands has a dozen gajillion hands and a dozen gajillion cookie jars. So this guy's got it all. He's working for influence in the stacks, influence with other corps, potentially poking holes in the NC port system, such as it is, as if it doesn't need more holes. Getting leverage over the rich, getting leverage over the powerful. Hands is trying to be Mr. Worldwide. I wish all the quests in 2077, all the gigs for all the fixers, I wish they were all this fleshed out and complicated and just, I love playing through Hans's quests. Kurt Hansen is dead, and Hans wants to install the guy who should not be using the PA as much as he does, but I get it. Chester is sad that Kurt is dead. Except Bennett, I don't think is sad at all. Bennett, in the Codex, is described as loyal to Kurt, but we can find, peppered throughout Dogtown, that he's not as loyal as that entry might make him seem. We already took a look at those emails between him and Mr. Hands, but we hear in Hans's gig with the church Ripper Clinic that Bennett, despite Barghest typically keeping scavs under control and in their own little pockets, has likely taken a bribe from the scavs to look the other way during their raid on the church. Lots of Barghest members, like Ross Ulmer, can be caught trying to make a little more scratch under Kurt's nose, and Bennett is no exception. There's a shard where he says, when doing some shady dealing with Dodger, fuck Hansen. A lot of people seem to view Bennett as very dumb, but beneath his meathead giant chrome dome layer, he's not as dumb as maybe Yago or Kurt or Hans think he is. He's actually kind of a schemy little fella, even if his schemes aren't as creative as his rivals/handlers. His strength is that people underestimate him. Looking back at the emails between him and Hans, the way Hans sort of talks down to him, and the way Bennett kind of responds like, oh, no. I can't help but wonder if Bennett was doing that on purpose. Like he was hiding stuff on purpose, or if he was playing dumb on purpose. It wouldn't shock me. It needs to be noted here that no matter what you do in the Firestarter quest, Kurt ends up dead. If V or Alex doesn't get him, then a mysterious other figure will. Or at least that's how Mr. Hands refers to this mysterious figure. Kurt Hansen will either be shot dead, or as Hands says in his text, caught the proverbial stray bullet, which is quite the coincidence when you remember that one of Kurt's original PA announcements from earlier on in the campaign uses that term. This is definitely probably meaningless, but this isn't the first time that Mr. Hands has sort of directly quoted one of Kurt Hansen's PA broadcasts in conversation. He actually says to V, when he gives V the information to get into the Black Sapphire, a little something about pirouettes. And in another of Kurt's broadcasts that you can hear, I think if you don't save Myers, I think that's when it plays. So it's kind of easy to miss it. He tells a story about a guy that got killed during Operation Midnight Storm who wanted to be a professional dancer, and he made a bit of a joke about the guy spinning around when he got shot like he was doing a pirouette. There might be more little things that Hands sneaks into his dialogue lines that connect to other characters in a very like, ha 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 kind of way, but it could also just be me overanalyzing the shit out of something. That's also likely. The other way that he can die is that he dies in the hospital when the cam feeds are cut following his boss fight with V if he's left alive. Now, many in my Kurt Hansen video think this is Hans's doing. Maybe a random goon carried out the killing on Hans's behalf, or maybe it was Bennett who did it. It would certainly be to Hans's benefit and Bennett's. But I do think that Hans is smart enough to know that there was already some ravenous wolves eager for their own piece of the Barghest pie. He would only have to know that the FIA are up to something, V's involved, and Kurt Hansen is stressing. The kettle is almost boiled, better get that tea steeping and just wait. And we also have to remember that Bennett, I don't think he's as cunning as he'd need to be to get away with killing Kurt Hansen unnoticed. I actually think someone else kills Hansen in those two potential endings, or is at least far more likely to have been the perpetrator. And that person is Iago Sabo. Do I have a shitload of proof of this? I do not know. But Iago, while he's not an assassin himself, insofar as we know, is conniving. He's very wily, and he has his own section of Barghest under his sway. Charles, Iago's bodyguard, could, if he caught Hansen in surprise, maybe take him out. Maybe in the hospital, Iago could pay someone to unplug the Colonel's life support. My main reason for thinking Iago had something to do with this is Hans's own reluctance to have him in a position of power. Iago is too smart for him to control the way he wants to. But maybe, on top of that, he has another reason. So Hans has V come in to try and scare Iago and Bennett into making the decisions that Hans wants them to, using the identity of the Cuban assassin, Aguilar. But as pointed out by Callum Roberts, 1212, in my Mr. Hands post, the fact that Mr. Hands knows that V has that experimental Militech tech installed, that can almost kind of hint that Hands has some people in his sphere who fill him in on what's going on with the FIA. I'm pretty sure that there is a line that Reed says that implies that that technology, with all its chameleonic powers, it's a prototype, and it's not yet widely available. So Hands definitely has friends in high places, high enough too, to get this very mysterious, slippery assassin's biodata. It's definitely sketchy, and it makes you wonder just how far his reach is. Hands wants us to get Iago to back down and let Bennett be in charge. We can find out about Bennett's sneaky plan to sell out to Arasaka, depending on how we speak to Iago. Hands seems a bit surprised by this discovery, and I like that they show that. Because as clever and smart as Mr. Hands is, as much as he maintains that illusion that he knows all, he really doesn't. Like any other person, Hands is capable of fucking up. And I also like that this option can give us a glimpse of Iago as the clever schemer that he is. The schemer who sniffed out Bennett's other scheme before Hands even did. But this doesn't really change Mr. Hands' mind on anything because he still wants Bennett in charge over Iago. So yes, V can make that happen. And in a number of cases, Bennett will actually kill Iago after demanding Iago's contacts. And to me, that Bennett isn't as dumb as people think, combined with the potential of Iago being behind Kurt's death in some endings. Maybe Bennett wants the contacts to investigate for himself. Even with Iago's death, Hands is just happy to have his puppet in the seat of power. But should we put Iago in charge, Hands is fucking pissed. I think he's so mad because at this moment, all his work has amounted to nothing. It's done, it's crashed, it's burned. Except it's not. Because Hands will later text V, admitting that Iago is actually quite the alright business partner. Maybe Iago and Hands actually spoke plainly, and they realized they have a common interest. A common method of doing business. Maybe, a la Aurora Cassell, they want to clean up Dogtown a little bit. Because no matter what ending you pick, there is apparently, according to numerous players, and also I've noticed it too, I don't know if I'm crazy or not though, less scavs and also less voodoo boys roaming the district. So yeah, there's some cleaning of the clock going on, even if Bennett's in charge, and I'd wonder if that's Hands' influence. Hands is, however, incredibly impressed when V does manage to keep both Iago and Bennett alive, and working together. Because now Hands has access to the malleable Bennett and the money-making genius of Iago. And who knows, maybe Iago and he will form a stronger alliance as time goes on. You got the nerd and the jock combining forces under the one who will rule them both. The daddy of Dogtown. I do love that. Depending on how you choose to see Mr. Hands, you can potentially see a man who has had too much ambition, such a lust for wealth and power that he endangered his family in the process. And he may very well be doing it again, just repeating that cycle. Or you could see him as a dedicated father, just trying to do what he does best to keep his family safe. Perhaps within those Dogtown walls, where no corpse can reach them. Maybe Mr. Hands views the fortress of Dogtown as like the rook that will defend his queen. But like Kurt Hansen, he should be cautious. Those walls could very easily become his prison. The fact that Hands is sort of in a tomb himself. There's this line from Mad Men, I can't remember exactly what it was. It was something along the lines of, "You want to build a golden tomb and seal us all in with you." People have different faces for different people. Hands may very well be both these perspectives. He can be ruthless, he can be calculating. No matter how polished he is, his morals certainly aren't. But he can also be a devoted father, a husband, a tender person behind closed doors who makes his own tea and is a cat person. Not to throw two quotes in the outro, but I'm also thinking of that Mass Effect 2 quote from Samara the Justicar, where she says, "If I must kill a man because he has done wrong, do I really wish to know that he is a loving and devoted father?" And while definitely the context of that quote does not apply between Mr. Hands and V, I think about that quote a lot when I think about Mr. Hands. He might not be everyone's favorite fixer, but he's certainly the fleshed out, multi-layered kind of character that I wish all the other fixers could have been. Oh, Mr. Hands. Now that this video is done, I will never make the mistake of Googling your name again. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Mr. Hands. I have like this memory in the back of my brain of his old voice actor and his old model. And my brain seems to think that he had more than just that one drug running gig. Did Hands have other gigs aside from the drug running one that they kept as his first gig in Pacifica? The whole time I was writing this video, I was like, Am I crazy? I don't know. Because sometimes I swear, like, I remember things happening in this game, but then when I go and play it again, it's gone, and I don't know. This outro isn't about anything extra to add on about Mr. Hands. This is just me expressing my brain is either broken or I blame the techno necromancers from Alpha Centauri. Thank you so much, members, once again for your support of the channel. It means a lot. And you know what, members? I would never build a pyramid and stuff you in and not let you bring a cat, because that would just be rude. You should always, this is a cat-friendly establishment. And of course, thank you so much to everybody for watching. Thank you for liking, for commenting, for subscribing, leaving your thoughts. It means a lot. Have a good one, guys. And I will see you again in the next one. Goodbye.